Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a real-life historical detective story, and we're going to peel back the layers on a report that's about 1,400 years old. We'll be using the source material itself to see what we can find.
So right at the center of this whole thing is this really famous report. It's attributed to Aisha, who was one of the Prophet Muhammad's most well-known wives. And her statement, right here on the screen, about her age at marriage, well, it's easily one of the most famous and, frankly, most debated reports in the entire Islamic tradition. And that brings us to the big question, right? How on earth can a historian even begin to investigate a memory from 1,400 years ago? Look, our goal here isn't about belief, it's about method. We're going to put on our detective hats and follow the clues, just like a modern scholar would, using their tools of critical analysis. Okay, so to solve any mystery, you need the right tools. We've got to open up the historian's detective kit. And believe me, scholars of early Islam have some really sophisticated tools for digging into ancient reports just like this one. The kind of report we're looking at is called a hadith. You can think of these as the fundamental building blocks for a lot of early Islamic history. And here's what's so cool about them. Every single hadith is made of two critical parts. And those parts are our primary pieces of evidence. So first up, you've got the isnad. That's just the chain of transmission, literally a list of who told who told who. And then you have the matn, which is the actual story itself. Scholars, they look at both of these incredibly closely because, hey, a story is only as solid as the chain of people who passed it down. Now, maybe the most powerful tool in the whole kit is something called common link analysis. The idea here is pretty brilliant. You take all the different transmission chains for one report, and you map them out. And what you often find is that all these different paths, they all lead back to one single person. It's like tracing all the branches of a tree back to the trunk. And that person? That's your common link. All right, Detective Kit is open. Let's actually use this tool on our case. So when scholars do this, when they map out all the chains for this hadith about Aisha's age, something amazing happens. A really, really clear pattern starts to emerge. So let's trace the evidence together. Scholars looked at dozens and dozens of these transmission chains, stories recorded by different people in totally different cities. And they found that all of them, somehow, led back to one surprising single point. And that single point is a single person. All these independent chains converge on one man, Hisham ibn Urwa. And get this, he was Aisha's own great-nephew. That makes him, without a doubt, the common link. Think about what that means. Pretty much every version of this story that we have today passed through him. So, Hisham is now our key person of interest. Now, hold on. Finding the common link doesn't automatically mean he made the story up, right? He could have just been the one who was really good at passing on a true family memory. To figure out which it is, we have to ask a simple question. Where and when did Hisham tell this story? And this, my friends, is where the case gets really fascinating. Because the next big clue isn't about what was said, it's about where it wasn't said. The geography of this report is, well, it's a huge giveaway. So let's look at Hisham's life. He was a big deal scholar in his hometown of Medina. That's the Prophet city. He lived there, he taught there for more than 70 years. It was only at the very, very end of his life, around 754, that he packed up and moved to Kufa, which was this booming town over in Iraq. And right here is where we find this incredible contrast. I mean, think about it. 70 years teaching in Medina, and yet this report about Aisha's age? It's basically nowhere to be found among his students there. But his students in Iraq? Oh, they're telling it all over the place. The sources are crystal clear on this. The vast, vast majority of the time this story is told, it's coming from his time in Iraq. This is what scholars call an argumentum e silentio, an argument from silence. It's like the clue of the dog that didn't bark in the night. The report is completely missing from where you'd absolutely expect to find it. I mean, take the Muwatta of Malik, a super important early legal book from Medina. It talks all about marriage law, but this report, it's never mentioned, not once, even though it would have been perfect evidence for them to use. That silence, it's deafening. Okay, so let's recap the clues. They all seem to point to this story really popping up with Hisham, specifically during his time in Iraq in the mid-700s. And that leads to the final question every detective has to ask. Why? What was the motive? What was going on in 8th century Iraq that would make this specific story appear at that specific time? Well, the source material points us to the political climate of the time. 8th century Kufa was basically a sectarian pressure cooker. You had these fierce, intense debates raging about who had the right to lead. And in that kind of environment, stories about the special virtues of important figures, well, they became powerful political weapons. For people who supported Aisha's legacy, this report did something very specific. It highlighted her unique status as the Prophet's only virgin wife, which was a huge deal in these arguments about who had more prestige. All right, we've got all the pieces on the board. Let's put them together now and reconstruct the whole story, just like a detective laying out the case in the final scene. So here it is, the whole case in a nutshell. You start with the report itself, you trace all the lines of evidence back, and they point to one man, Hisham, as the common link. Then you look at the geography, and the story only seems to appear late in his life in Iraq, not during his 70 years in Medina. And finally, you have the motive, the superheated political world of Kufa, where this story would have been incredibly useful. The verdict? From this scholarly detective work, the report most likely originates with Hisham in Iraq.
And this is the really crucial takeaway. This whole exercise isn't about judging the past. It's about understanding how history itself is made, how a memory gets formed and passed down. What this case study shows so powerfully is that stories about the past are so often shaped by the needs and the arguments of the present moment when they're being told.
And that kind of leaves us with one final big thought, doesn't it? Digging deep into this one report really blows open these much bigger questions, about how traditions get built in the first place, how people establish authority, and how memory itself isn't static. It gets transmitted and even changed over time. It's just a powerful reminder that every single story has a story of its own.